does it feel not to have to go to work, school? I'm sure you're still in the building.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'd like to call this first meeting of the Interim Joint Budget Review Subcommittee on Education to order. At this time, I'd like to ask Amy to call the roll.
Senator Neal, Senator West,
Prepare.
Representative Baker, Representative Bojanowski,
Here.
Representative Graham,
Here.
Representative Lewis, Representative Palumbo, Representative Riley, Representative Timoney, Representative Tipton, Senator Janine,
Here.
Chair McCool.
Here.
Ruth Ann.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I want to recognize my co-chair. I think Representative Benson hasn't got in yet, but she may be here shortly. But Senator Deneen, and see if he has any comments or like to go ahead and make.
Not this time. I'm glad to be back.
All right, we're good. Thank you so much for being here. I'd like to go ahead and get things rolling. Ask Kentucky State University to come forward and introduce themselves and go ahead and start your presentation, please.
Good morning. My name is Tammy Dukes. I'm the chairman of the board of Kentucky State University.
Stephanie Mayberry, Vice Provost of Student Affairs.
And good morning, I'm Michael Daly. I am the interim provost and vice president for academic and student affairs.
Welcome, glad to have you. And if you don't mind, go ahead and start your presentation.
Thank you. So good morning, co-chairs, Representative Bobby McCool, Senator Matthew Deneen, and Representative Kim Banta, which I know she's not here yet, and the distinguished members of the Budget Review Subcommittee on Education. On behalf of Kentucky State University, I'm honored to be before you today to extend our deepest gratitude to this committee and the entire General Assembly for the historic investment in Kentucky State University's future. Your support has led to the largest general fund allocation in our history, a nearly 400% increase in asset preservation funding totaling $60 million and $5 million for the planning and design of the new healthcare science education program. Your backing, especially through the passage of House Bill 250 in 2022, has been crucial in helping us achieve measurable outcomes and fostering a brighter future for the students and the Commonwealth. Over the past 2 years, in the partnership with the the Council for Post-Secondary Education, we have made significant progress in enhancing our institutional effectiveness, financial stability, and academic excellence. These improvements are already yielding positive results. One of the most significant milestones in Kentucky State University's recent history is the hiring of Dr. Akapo, our 19th president of Kentucky State University. In just 11 months, his visionary leadership has transformed our institution. Under his guidance, we have expanded partnerships with high schools across the Commonwealth and neighboring states, creating seamless pathways for students through articulation agreements and with various institutions. While Dr. Capo is currently abroad on a long-planned trip to expand access for students and forge international educational and business partnerships, his mission and the mission of KSU remains focused on broadening access and bringing greater benefits to the Commonwealth of Kentucky. This year, we have and are continuing to concentrate on 3 primary goals: balancing our budget, ensuring robust internal controls within our financial systems, and growing student enrollment. These goals are vital to the strategy for sustainable growth and long-term success. I am now pleased to introduce Provost Dr. Michael D. Daly, who will provide further insight into the initiatives and the progress we are making, and thanks to that unwavering support. Thank you again. Your support and dedication to the future of Kentucky State University will not be forgotten. Dr. Daly.
Good morning again. Thank you all for the opportunity to share some updates with you. I'll begin by talking a little bit about the Management Improvement Plan, which is part of House Bill 250, as you recall. We could go ahead and show that slide. And I just want to let you know that over the past 11 months, in partnership with our Council on Post-Secondary Education, we've completed 53 of the objectives. 72 are in progress, which is about 55%. We have pending approval 3, and we'll probably add a couple more in that pending category for approval here later this month. We've seen some remarkable things happen. This is not just a checklist to go through and say, oh, we've done this and we're moving on. It is about making sure that not only do we have the best practices in place, but we're ensuring those best practices are sustainable. Because if you have sustainable practice, you see sustainable growth. And I'm really proud of the team that has come together, and it's been across the entire university, from academic affairs, student affairs, finance, management, governance. Each and every area is dedicated to making sure, not just to make sure the plan is implemented, but dedicated to the practices are implemented, and it is carrying us forward as a university. And so as you look across the Management Improvement Plan, and as we talked about yesterday, you're seeing the impacts on our students. And we should be student-centered. We should have active learning. We should and must to have continuous growth for those students and continuous growth at the university. So later on in the presentation, you're going to hear from Student Affairs. You're also going to hear from our CFO and the person that's in charge of our facilities to talk about how all those things come together to show that Kentucky State is moving forward.
As Chair Dukes mentioned, we are focused on our enrollment. That's one of our priorities. When Dr. Capo joined us on campus, one of his first directives for me was to grow our enrollment to 3,000 students. And so we have been intentional about our outreach and recruitment for students. We've hired 5 admissions specialists that have been divided in regions across the state. We also recognize that we have an influx of students that are coming from Ohio and Indiana and Illinois. And so we still recruit those students, but a lot of that is through our alumni chapters and through word of mouth. Right now, we are sitting at, and these numbers have improved since, are increased since we sent in this presentation, but we're sitting at 22 is total applications, and those students, 1,296 have completed applications, and 1,206 have been admitted. We have 206 that have scheduled orientation, so we are continuing to work that 1,206 to increase our yield for the fall semester.
Can I stop right there? Because I got a brief question, so
Okay.
while you're on that topic, that's okay. And I understand that you've probably increased your in-state enrollment, which is good from previous years. And you want to keep your out-of-state going too, but I'm curious about, are these revenue-generating students? Are they being internal scholarships, or are you getting some money out of the out-of-state?
Yes, we
students?
are. So in addition to working on the enrollment, there was also a team that revamped our scholarship program. Previously, we did have a lot of scholarshiping and discounting that we did for primarily out-of-state students, because that was the biggest group of students that we had. But what we're looked at now is having a performance-based funding. Those students who are merit scholars, who have the higher GPAs and ACT scores, SAT scores, those students do receive some scholarships, but not in the numbers previously. We're looking at maybe 25 students that would receive that, but that's evenly distributed between Kentucky and probably more Kentucky than out of state. Then we also have need-based funding for our scholarship program, and this is really based on the FAFSA FAFSA and their student aid index. And so those students that are 0 and below will receive tuition, but we also know that we'll generate funding from CAP, KEYS, and Pell to help cover and offset those expenses for those students.
Okay, so thank you. So they are paying tuition?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Please go forward.
In addition to our first-time, full-time freshmen, we also have transfer students, and this number has increased significantly to 170 that have applied for admission from transfer. We've been intentional in working with our KCTCS partners to bring in those students that have earned an associate degree to come in and continue to a bachelor's degree at Kentucky State. That has been supplemented by our KYSU Online, which will give them the option to remain where they are, because what we do know is that some of the students from Eastern and Western Kentucky don't necessarily want to move to Frankfort, but they are still able to be a KSU student by joining our online programs. In addition to that, we have our dual credit program. Last year, we had approximately 400 students that were participating in our dual credit program. We anticipate 1,000 students because we've grown our partnerships with the school districts from 4 or 5 to 17 for fall 24. So we anticipate that number to be a dramatic increase as well. And our graduate recruitment has doubled, and so we're continuing to work on that and focus on that group of students as well to grow our graduate programs. That again will be aided by KYSU Online. And then our continuing students, we have the number is 638. That number has risen again. Those students need to continue. We have approximately 500 of those students that have not yet registered for varying reasons. I think that a part of it is the culture that students wait until the fall semester to register. So we have been intentional about getting those students registered over the summer. So we're continuing outreach with advisors, and I'll speak to that on the next slide. So we've had some outreach and yield efforts to make sure that we are bringing in the enrollment and increasing the enrollment to meet Dr. Acapo's goal. We had admitted student receptions in Lexington and Louisville, and we look to grow those in the coming year. We have assigned advisor outreach for our continuing students, as I just mentioned. We have weekly email reminders that are auto-generated to encourage students to sign up for new student orientation. We also have a partnership with the Family Scholar House where we place phone calls to students to ensure that they've completed housing applications, that they've completed the FAFSA, that they've registered for classes, so that they have everything in place so that we can start strong at the start of the fall semester. We've also gone old school and had handwritten postcards to students to encourage them to apply, and we've asked our current students to send those postcards out to incoming freshmen because they listen to their peers more than they listen to us. As far as financial aid, we were able to award $16 million. Approximately $10 million of that was federal aid, and $6 million was from state aid, from KEYS, CAP, and things like that. Our numbers are lower as far as FAFSA completion rates than they were last year, just because of the FAFSA rollout, and that's for all institutions across the country and here in Kentucky as well. But we are working again with those campaigns to increase our FAFSA completion rates. Right now, we have 3,276 FAFSA applications that we've received for students that are intending or have indicated that KSU is one of their options. We now have a full financial aid staff. I know that, in previous testimony, we've talked about the issues that we were having with our financial aid staff. So we do have a full staff now and working to get our awards packaged for the next academic year. We are, again, completing outreach via email, call campaigns to ensure that all of our registered students have completed the FAFSA as well. Our retention rates, last year we were at 61%. That's not where we wanted to be. Right now, today, we're at 66.54% for our retention rate, but we project to get to the 75%. That is included in that 500 students that have yet to register. We anticipate that most of those students, a large portion, at least 75% of those students will register, which will get us to the 75% marker. So that is a significant increase, and that's a part of our intentional work to make sure that the students have the holistic support, comprehensive support to be successful at Kentucky State. Our graduation rates, last year, our 6-year graduation rate was at 28%. This year, with our largest graduating class of approximately 327 students, our 6-year graduation rate is 34%. And again, as I mentioned yesterday, this is not our benchmark. This is not where we want to stay, but it is a significant improvement, and we're going to continue to work on that. And we've set goals with CPE about where we want to be so that we are in a similar graduation rate as our peer institutions. I think that's the conclusion of our presentation. And okay.
Can you hold 1 second? I think Representative Timoney has a question, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you so far for this presentation. Can we dive into the numbers a little bit?
Yes.
The 61% retention rate, where are you seeing students leaving? What year?
The retention rate, that the 61% is first to second year.
That's first to second.
Yes, that's first to
Okay.
second year.
And then the graduation rates, the 6-year graduation rates, is it evenly distributed over that time when students are leaving? Because I'm assuming they're not staying for a 7th or an 8th year.
Some students are, but the majority, yes, we're losing them. A lot of them at the freshman year. There's a sophomore slump that happens, and that happens at every institution. But what we are also finding is that students linger, right? So they're there, they're coming back. So the retention, they're staying, but they're not progressing toward degree, right? And so then if they stay a little bit longer, if they stay one semester longer, they don't count in our graduation rate because they're beyond the 6-year graduation rate.
And what about, how do those numbers compare for the out-of-state students versus in-state students?
I don't have the breakdown of that,
Okay.
But I can get that and get it to you.
Because I think that would be kind of one of this interesting kind of like if our out-of-state students are sticking it through, graduating sooner because it costs more, or, I think that would be an interesting data point to kind of look at and kind of get kind of some of the psychology behind it, the pathway there. So thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Representative Graham has a question, I think.
Thank you. Just to address many of those kids who are attending Kentucky State who come from out of state, Indiana, Ohio particularly, they have a connection to Kentucky. Either their parents were from Kentucky, and then when they graduated because they had to find jobs, they went to Indiana, Ohio, Michigan. That's those 3 major states. When I was there, those were the 3 major states in which most of those out-of-state people attended Kentucky State University. Is that the same still?
I believe it is.
And most of them have a connection to Kentucky?
They have a connection to Kentucky State or word of mouth, right? So somebody else does have a connection, and then I'm going to Kentucky State, so they bring a friend with them.
And I do know this, educators who were teaching some of these students directed them there. It's always been that way.
That's correct.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask another question, please?
Yes.
As you all know, one of the primary asks by the university was the building of a new nursing school because we were getting more and more people. I believe it was like 500 new people who were coming into the university system. And as you know, it was not put in the budget for this biennium with the understanding that it would be addressed in the next biennium budget. My question to you all, how much of an impact will that have on the university between now and the next time that we deal with the budget?
Yes, I can answer that question. It does have a significant bearing on, our ability to, expand our programs. The current facility is in much need of repair. It was initially an infirmary that housed, patients and that sort of thing. And so we are in a situation where this just delays us being able to expand many programs, not just the nursing program, but our allied health program as well. And so, it just delays our progress in getting that done.
But you're still seeing a lot of students coming into the program, and that's my concern.
Yes.
Is that, but you've done it, and you're successful at it, but we need that new facility for those students to learn and to be prepared. And they already are prepared because you have 100%
Pass rate.
We have
passing
yeah, we
of
do.
the
Nursing
test.
program.
So anyway, I hope, I'm not going to be around, but I hope that the General Assembly will work hard to make sure that that building is done and appropriation for that building is taking place because the university needs it. And all the other universities have been able to get in this budget cycle what they requested, except for Kentucky State University. Thank you all, and thank you for the work that you do for my university and for this community, but more importantly, for the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Thank you.
Thank you.
Also, Representative Tipton has a question or comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to follow up on Representative Graham's question, I agree that Allied Health Sciences building is essential. I've been in that building. President Apaka visited me during session, and the first thing he said to me, it's much worse than I thought it was going to be. And what he was talking about was the condition of the current infrastructure. He shared some of the crises you all had to deal with busted pipes. HVAC systems that wouldn't work below a certain temperature resulted in problems, and you need help. What will the impact of the additional asset preservation dollars mean for KSU in the near and distant future?
Yeah, we'll bring our facilities person up
Sure.
so you can get it directly from the source.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Linton. I'm the Director of Capital Planning and Facilities Management for Kentucky State University. So the university is very appreciative of the $60 million that we've received in the upcoming biennium and also what was in the current biennium's budget. So say your question one more time. I'll make sure I answer.
What's the significance and the impact of that additional asset preservation budget for KSU in the near and distant future?
So we already have plans in place for pretty much how we're going to spend the entire $60 million, and a huge portion of that is going to go towards our mechanical, electrical, and plumbing infrastructure on the campus. As Dr. Capo told you, I mean, we have major problems on campus, and we're working through plans right now, not only through building renovations, but just also campus-wide to get systems replaced and repaired so we don't have the problems that he had discussed with you.
Yes.
I could follow up and kind of go in a different direction. One of the provisions in House Bill 250 was that CPE send out a monthly financial report on the status of what's going on at Kentucky State University, and I read those every month. Actually got my email yesterday, had a chance to review it, and there were a lot of positive things on here I want to share. That in May, looks like in May of 23, the days cash on hand for university was 2. As of April 30th, days cash on hand was 93. And I know that's been during the tenure of President Apaka coming on. I look at the actual and budgeted expenses, actually the actual expenses are about $5 million under budget. What was budgeted about $1 million, a little over $1 million under what was actual for the same time period a year ago. And the biggest part of that was salaries and wages, and that's one of the provisions we put in House Bill 250 was provisions to allow the university to take the steps that are necessary to right the ship. But I read all the numbers, and there was one glaring number that stuck out to me. In drafting House Bill 250, I did a lot of research. I read a lot of board minutes, committee minutes, budgets, and one of the long-standing issues at Kentucky State University has been student balances, unpaid student balances. And I just want to share with the committee and share with you. For the enrolled students in the current semester, a year ago, there were unpaid student balances of $610,895. As of April 30th, 24, the unpaid balances for current enrolled students was $2,010,000. For balances owed in prior semesters, for last year it was $75,900. This year it's almost $498,000. Then we'll look at the numbers for the non-enrolled student balances. That's a $1.8 million increase on current enrolled students. Non-enrolled students have a last year had a current balance of $20,547. This year, 21.3. When you total that up, currently you have outstanding student receivables of $23,800,000. That's $2.6 million additional dollars. That's troubling to me. That is a big red flag in this whole process, because that was one of the things that was dragging the university down in the past. And I know it was given as a priority. What is happening? What is the issue that these students are not able to fulfill their obligations with student debts? I know you all have been working with some of the federal COVID dollars to help relieve some of that. Those dollars are going away. So that's another factor to consider. So if you all could elaborate on what is causing this issue and what steps are Kentucky State University taking to reduce, hopefully eliminate this student debt, and as you increase enrollment, make sure this problem does not exasperate.
Please introduce yourself before you speak.
Thank you.
For the record, thank you.
I'm Vicki Dunaway. I'm the CFO Vice President for Kentucky State University. I started on March 18th, 2024. My previous experience is I was at the University of Kentucky for over 30 years in finance and administration, and am well attuned to policies and finances and state mandates and issues that need to happen. When you look at the $21 million of unenrolled students, this is a product of administrations prior to the president coming. This is a product of some administrators not stressing the importance of students paying their debt. So this is, with that $21 million, we are going to make with the board's approval, we're going to be making an adjusted entry to write that off as bad debt. We have personally reached out, our bursar's office has, our student success office has, to these students that are no longer there, that have accrued the $21 million, and we're not having success in recouping those funds. So it will have to be a write-off for bad debt. With the board approval and our auditors approving that. The $2.5 million that is from enrolled students, we have personally reached out. That was actually over $3 million in March. We've made some progress there. We're continuing to make progress, especially in returning students that are coming back, to ensure that they understand that there's loans available, there's scholarships available, and that they can also accrue debt through FAFSA. Some of them are very reluctant to accrue debt, so we're doing some education in regarding to that. We have about $1.3 million left in HERF funds that the university will apply towards the $2.5 million. So, and then we have other funds of money. The president has mandated if someone has a small balance, we look at their GPA and see if there's other ways the institution can help them, so that we won't have a $2.5 million debt at the end of this fiscal year.
Yes.
And I should have mentioned that $20 million of that debt is over 2 years old. We understand that's going to be written off. I understand that's from prior, I'll use the word bad actors. But I'm still concerned about the current year student debt. The increase of $1.8 million from one year to the other in outstanding student loan balances. We cannot see, I'm going to stress this, we cannot see this trend continue. I got a question. Do students who have outstanding debt, are they allowed to re-enroll for the next semester?
Dr. Daly, that would be a question for you, or Dr. Mayberry.
We are intentional about making sure that students know that they have to have a zero balance to register.
Okay.
That was one of the first things that we implemented this past fall. Students were not able to come back. They were not able to move into their room unless they had paid the balance, or at least set up a payment plan. And so we did do that. But I also want to highlight that the culture has been that the students understand that her funding is there, so they wait us out. And that's the culture that we have to overcome, is that they don't believe that the balances will be wiped by her. They have to understand that. we are making sure that we have education about that at the start of every semester. So this semester, tomorrow, on today's Wednesday, Friday, we'll have our first student orientation. I will have a presentation where I talk about the importance of student loans and investing in themselves to make sure that they cover their debt, making sure that they understand that if they have debt, they will not be able to return. They will be asked to leave if they go past a certain date and haven't made any arrangements. They will not be allowed to leave and move in with a balance that is unpaid or they don't have payments plans set up. So we are going to make sure that this culture shifts. Students are beginning to understand that, but it takes a little bit of time because, again, they know that the HERF funding existed prior, and so they've been waiting it out. And so some of those students have been here for 3 or 4 years, so they understand that.
Well, I understand that your student demographics, your student population has a large percentage of students who come from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. I understand your demographics, but also as a university, you got to pay your bills.
Yeah, absolutely.
In order to do that, you have to have that revenue. Now, are there any additional financial counseling for students when they enroll? I think we talk about financial literacy. We passed a bill adding financial literacy in high school a few years ago. And I think a lot of our young people just do not understand the dynamics of life financially, what their expectations are, what their obligations are. So have you been able to add additional counseling and support to help them understand that?
Yes. And so we've been partnering with Esprit Credit Union to offer financial literacy workshops with the students. And then I believe Dr. Daly can expand on this, but Dr. Gary Stratton is also working on a financial literacy component for our students.
Very good.
Yeah.
Could I follow up again? When is the first bond payment due on the new dorm? In July?
Yes, sir.
Refresh my memory, what is that annual bond payment?
With the maintenance included, it will be a little over $3 million, I believe. I don't have
Okay.
the exact figure, but I can get that for you. But we also have a maintenance plan included on that. President
Opaka explained that maintenance plan to me in detail. He explained the escalation part of that maintenance plan. I'm going to say for the record, whoever approved that contract in state government, I'm not going to use the word I'm thinking. It was irresponsible, and it's put Kentucky State University in a severe financial disadvantage. Folks, they didn't have locks on the doors when they finished that dorm. School had to go in there and put locks on the doors. There are a lot of things that were incomplete. And that maintenance plan, as I understand, is going to approach $1 million a year. And they really don't do that much. Am I correct in that?
Yes, and Ms. Litton can speak to that more than I can, but there are significant challenges because our staff have to go in there after students leave to perform the maintenance functions, and then we're charged for those by the leaseor, is what I will say.
Is there any possibility to renegotiate the terms of that agreement?
I think the only possibility would be if we had backing from the legislature to do that and to amend the maintenance part of the contract.
Okay. What's the tuition difference in that dorm and the other dorms on campus? I'm sorry. I feel like I'm doing a cross-examination, but
It is approximately $1,000 to $1,500 a semester more expensive, and even with what we're charging, it's not covering the cost.
That was going to be my next question. Is the room and board that you're charging on the new dorm going to fulfill the obligation of the bond payment?
We would have to charge the students $6,000 a semester in order to cover the bond payment.
So KSU is going to have to subsidize those bond payments with other funds to meet that obligation.
Yes.
Okay. Chairman Dukes, I asked this question yesterday. I apologize. I know it's not comfortable, but I think there are members of the committee that maybe not have been there yesterday. 2 points. Could you elaborate and explain what's going on with the foundation board in the warning letter from SACS? Just a brief explanation so the members are aware of those two situations.
Okay, I'll start with the foundation. So over at least the last 2 years that I've been on the Board of Regents, we have made countless attempts to forge and collaborate with the KSU Foundation. We've sent letters electronically. We've met with them in person, requesting documentation, requesting the status of the various scholarships and foundations that are available with the foundation. Yet we've received sporadic information, sporadic records, incomplete records, or in some instances, we didn't receive what we were asking for at all. And so it's caused us to really rethink our relationship with the foundation because it puts the university at risk. From the standpoint of having our annual audit performed, there is a portion within our audit report that speaks to the foundation and the foundation's financial stability. And we still have yet to receive our FY23 audit information from the foundation as well. And so it's really caused us to have some issues from a relationship standpoint with the foundation. And it's also caused us significant issues around our SAC-COC accreditation, because we are trying to make sure that we are performing our annual audit in a timely fashion. And as you may recall, we were 2 years behind on performing our audit in 2022. But now, 2 years later, we have completed FY21 and FY22 audits, but now we are trying to complete the FY23 audit. And we have a deadline of October to get both the FY23 audit and the FY24 audit completed. And so we're just working really hard to get that done to be ready for our evaluation in October.
You mentioned you were asked this question yesterday in education, but for the record, to the best of your all's information, how many funds are in the KSU Foundation?
Yes.
That's my last question.
No. That's a good question because I misquoted yesterday. There is $12 million in the KSU Foundation, and then the university has a $23 million endowment that's managed by Kentucky State University.
Thank you, Representative Tipton. I have a couple. I have a question and I have a comment. Then I want to turn it over to my co-chair, Senator Deanan. On the outstanding money, $20 million from previous debts, are you reaching out to some outside agency for a collection? You may not get all of that, of course, certainly, but if you get anything, it's going to be a positive.
Yes, we're working with the state office of Department of Revenue to turn those accounts over, and many of them have already been reported. So hopefully we will recoup some of those funds.
Okay, that's another good step. Appreciate that very much. On the foundation board, I just want to make a comment. I find it very disturbing when the foundation board doesn't work with the university, any university. At a time of need, KSU needs it now. And I don't know who's on this board. I don't know the individual, but I just find it very disturbing because they're there to help the university and to help the students. Whatever personal differences or whatever it is that's separating should be dissolved quickly because they're really hurting the students and they're hurting the university. Not only are they hurting this individual university, when a foundation does that, unfortunately in my mind, it hurts other universities. Because private donors who donate that money, if they see something going on that doesn't look right or feel right, it could impact other universities as well. Because if you donate money, you want it to go for a specific reason. And then it not happening is just very disturbing. I'm not upset at you all, I'm just disturbed with the foundation board not being cooperative. I just want to make that comment. Now, Senator Deanan, you have a question? A comment.
But before he goes on, I have to totally agree with you. we have made every effort we possibly could to forge those relationships. And so we have no other choice but to, draw a line in the sand to say, if we don't receive this information, if you don't discontinue this issue with the Franklin Media Group, and we don't renegotiate the memorandum of understanding, we can't continue to do business with you. And so, there's been a lot of back and forth, and I'm really concerned with how things have kind of shaped up as far as this is concerned. And so is the Board of Regents. And we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the university and its students. And that's where my heart is, and that's where my intention is. And so as we go forward, we'll have to do what we have to do to get that done.
And thank you, and I agree with you too. The foundation is a very important part of any university. Mm-hmm. But their role is very specific.
Absolutely.
It's to help the university and the students.
Absolutely.
They're not there to be the governing body. They're not there to run the university. And somewhere that's been missed. But thank you for your efforts. Mm-hmm. Senator Dina.
Thank you. I just want to kind of piggyback on the last topic here. Does the university have a timeline of which to resolve these issues with your foundation board? Is there something in place, upcoming meetings, to where you all have something in place that we as a committee can look forward to a resolution?
We have already drawn our line in the sand. And so it's just a matter of retrieving the funds that are at the foundation. And so over the next weeks and months, there will be additional actions because we're not getting the response we need from the foundation.
Okay, I would be nice to see those dates set and time frames set in stone so that you know what next steps to take if those aren't met by those dates. Just a follow-up question on, and I want to move away from the topic at hand here, just to refer back to your earlier part of your presentation in dealing with student recruitment. You mentioned that you're doing some student outreach in Fayette and Jefferson County and working with ECTC to bring in students, KYTC to bring in other students, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, and are those outreach programs, are you getting out there to these local high schools and counselors, and how many teams do you have, and are you sending those out there to promote KSU enrollments and to try to get those FAFSA forms filled out with the counselors and all of that? It is a daunting task to reach out to our high school students across the Commonwealth. I realize that, but it is paramount in your position to have recruitment teams working all parts of the Commonwealth.
Yes.
So can you expand on that, those student recruitment efforts?
Yes, sir. We do have admission specialists, and we've divided the state into 5 regions. And so each of them cover every county in their region. We did hire those specialists in January, and prime recruiting time is September through November. So we're behind the 8 ball. We recognize that. And so what we are doing is that we've started to build the relationships. We've had to rebuild those relationships because we were not recruiting heavily in Kentucky. And so we've tried to repair those relationships, get in front of the school districts, the superintendents, the principals. There's been a team of upper administration to do that, as well as our admissions counselors. We are intentional about how we're going to go into our planning for fall. We have a fall calendar to cover the fairs, to have school visits in all 120 counties in Kentucky to make sure that we're touching every student. Every student is aware of Kentucky State as a viable, affordable option in the Commonwealth. Because we have the team in place, we feel confident that we can see a significant difference in our Kentucky recruitment for the upcoming year.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Co-Chair, Senator Neal has a question or comment.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that. I was just sitting here thinking about all the tough questions that have been put to you, and those questions have to be put. There's no question about that. But I'm equally impressed with your responses, that you recognize the challenges, that you're taking action in the respective areas that are being raised. And I think we all recognize that you've inherited what you have, and you have to work through that. And we have to resist trying to micromanage what you do, because you know details that we won't even know as you operate from day to day. So I just want to make the comment that, and I made this comment yesterday, first of all, I'm impressed with the presentation. I'm impressed and I'm hit by the fact that it appears to me that you have your hands around this, you know what you have to do and where you have to go. My biggest question is, what is the legislature going to do in giving you sufficient support, financially and timely support, in order to reach the objectives that I think we all want? And that's the only question I have. I'm not going to ask you that question now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to reach out to you, and I'm going to gain that information through some forensic, am I using the right word, Mr. Chairman? Through some process where I can, that's data-driven, where I can review it and I can understand that. But again, I want to thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. No, we cut you off in the middle of your presentation, I guess. Do you have more to share with us, or?
No, I think
we're good.
I think we're good. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, but I do appreciate what you've done. I really want to say that too, and I agree with Senator Neal. You've done a fantastic job. You've got a long way to go.
You're right.
But every strive you're making is in a positive direction, and that's always good to see. Is there any other questions from committee? Well, thank you again for your time, and we look forward to working with you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I'd like to go ahead and have the Council of Post-Secondary Education come forth and talk to us a little bit about and give an update on the post-secondary education performance funding. Please introduce yourself and begin your presentation.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. My name is Travis Powell. I'm Vice President General Counsel at CPE.
My name is Bill Payne. I'm Vice President for Finance and Administration at CPE.
Thanks so much for having us today. Chair McCool, do we have the same amount allotted time as we discussed, the 30 minutes, or do we need to go a little quicker? I just thought I would ask before we get started.
We're running a little bit close, but
okay,
so
we'll
hit the highlights.
We'll hit the we'll give the full presentation, but and of course, if you have any questions on anything, we'll be happy to answer those at any time. Before I get go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say it's been a while since we come together, so we probably got lots of questions. So
great. Okay. So we're here today to talk about the performance-based funding model. We've been asked to give a overview, history of the funding model, sort of how it came about, talk a little bit about and to do that, we'll talk about the model components and the metrics within the model. Dr. Payne's going to take that section, and then I will go through the funding model reviews to talk about the performance funding work group and the review process that has gone into the funding model, and then do a brief section at the end about the assessment of the effectiveness of the model. So, Dr. Payne?
Thank you, Travis. And I'm going to assume that you would prefer to hear about recent history as opposed to ancient history, so I'm going to go through these first several slides fairly quickly. First of all, I want to convey what was the main motivation for developing the performance funding models, what was the main objective of the working group, what state goals for higher education were the models designed to achieve, And what were the major decisions that members of that working group had to make to achieve consensus and construct the model? In terms of the impetus for the model, we were responding to what you asked us to do. And when I say you, I mean the General Assembly. In House Bill 303, the budget bill from the regular session 2016 had a mandate in it for CPE to convene a working group and develop the model. And just so you know, the composition of that working group was prescribed in the budget bill language. The working group shall be composed of the president of the council, the president of each public university, including the president of KCTCS, the governor or his or her representative, the speaker of the House or his or her representative, and the president of the Senate or his or her representative. And we're going to be talking about 3 different working groups today. There was one in 2016, one in 2020, and one in 2023. Travis will cover those latter 2 working groups, but the composition of all 3 working groups were the same. So it was basically a group of presidents, the council president, and some state policymakers. But in addition to responding to that legislative mandate, we wanted to accelerate progress toward the attainment of state goals for post-secondary education. We also wanted to address some shortcomings of the previous funding method. Previously, we had used a base plus, a base minus approach to fund the institutions. Whatever percentage of the total system funding you got the prior biennium, that was the percentage you would get the next biennium. There was no consideration of enrollment growth, changes in program mix, or changes in outcomes produced. We felt like there were some real limitations to that approach. And then lastly, we wanted to rectify some funding disparities that had developed over time. And you can see that in the graph on this slide. This is showing net general fund appropriations per full-time equivalent student for fiscal year 2015-16. It excludes Kentucky State University, and you can see that Morehead State University is the top green bar. In 2015-16 had $5,709 state dollars per student. Northern, which is the bottom green bar, had $4,148. And so you can see that gap in funding. The purple bar is the group average. And if you look at that red bracket to the bottom right, Northern would have needed an additional $10.3 million in that year to be funded at the same level as the median, which was Eastern Kentucky University. Western would have needed an additional $4.7 million. So what was the main objective of that first working group in 2016? It was to develop a funding model that aligns state funding for higher education operations with desired state policy goals and appropriately reflects differences in missions across campuses. Here were the state goals that the funding model was designed to achieve: increase retention and progression of students toward timely completion, increase numbers of degrees and credentials earned by all students, produce more degrees and credentials in fields that garner higher wages upon completion, and then lastly, close achievement gaps by growing degrees and credentials earned by minority, low-income, and underprepared students. Now, the overarching goal of the working group and council staff was Kentucky's 60 by 30 college attainment goal. And you can see that goal listed on this slide. We want to raise the percentage of working age adults with a high quality post-secondary degree or certificate to 60% by the year 2030. Now, this is critical in terms of job creation, stimulating the economy, expanding the state's tax base. And so that was the reasoning or the rationale for that goal. That first working group had to make a number of decisions. I really want to emphasize here that this is not a model that was developed by the Council on Post-Secondary Education staff. It was the decisions of the presidents and the state policymakers on that first working group in 2016 that constructed the model. They made all of the decisions, and I've got a few of them listed here, but I couldn't possibly list all of the various decisions they had to make. But at any rate, what type of model did the working group want to adopt? Was it going to be a target and goals approach, or was it going to be outcomes-based? And you can see the little green check mark. They determined, okay, it needs to be outcomes-based. Do we want to have 3 sectors, or do we want to have 2? And the main decision there is, do you want to have the research institutions and the comprehensive universities in the same sector, or do you want to separate them? And the decision was made that they should be together. What should be the main components of the funding model? How much should each component be weighted? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. What metrics should be included in the model? And I will tell you that we looked at metrics that were used in funding models across the country. We brought in representatives from 3 different states to share their funding models. We had HCM strategists, experts come in and talk about performance funding. So we looked at a lot of different models. We looked at a lot of different metrics. But we had to make a decision. Are we going to reward in the funding model all degrees or bachelor's degrees only? And I'm talking specifically about the university model here. And the decision was made to do bachelor's degrees only. Are we going to graduate those metric weights to emphasize completion? The answer to that question was yes. Do we want to look at rates, like graduation rates and retention rates, or do we want to count volumes of outcomes, such as number of degrees produced or numbers of students progressing? The decision was made to focus on outcomes, not rates. In terms of earned credit hours, did we want to count all credit hours, including undergraduate, graduate, high school? The decision was made just to count undergraduate and graduate credit hours. And then lastly, what weighting in that earned credit hour component should be assigned to non-resident students? Several campus presidents wanted 0 weighting. Other presidents wanted 100% weighting. Consensus was reached at a 50% weighting. So all of these decisions were made, and that's how the original model was constructed, on the basis of those decisions. So in terms of the components and metrics, I want to talk about what are those components, what are the allocation percentages assigned to each components, what are the metrics, what are the allocation percentages assigned to those metrics, and how are those metrics determined. And I'm specifically going to be talking about primarily Kentucky's university model. It contains 5 main components. Student success, which is represented by the green slice of the pie chart you see on the right, and that 35% is allocated among institutions based on the share of student success outcomes they produce. Another component was course completion. That's represented by the yellow slice of the pie. Again, 35% for course completion. That's allocated or distributed among institutions based on the share of credit hours earned by each institution as a percent of the total for the universities. Then there were 3 operational support metrics represented by the purple slices of the pie: maintenance and operations, institutional support, and academic support, 10% each. You can see, for example, academic support was distributed among institutions based on the share of full-time equivalent student enrollment.
Bill, you want to talk?
Yeah.
I'll mention a little bit about how we get to that allocable resources number.
Okay, allocable resources is defined in statute, but you may not be familiar with that. We take the regular general fund appropriation from the budget bill each biennium, and in any given year, we take that regular general fund appropriation, we back out debt service, we back out mandated program funding because those dollars are not used to educate students, and then we back out one more thing. It's called a small school adjustment. We made an adjustment in the funding model to try to help institutions that had relatively small enrollment, like KSU, like Moorhead. So we backed out a small school adjustment to try to level the playing field somewhat, if you will. The decision of the working group was to go with a 10% small school adjustment. At that time, President Thompson, president of the council now, was the interim president at Kentucky State University. He lobbied for a 20 or 25% small school adjustment, and CPE staff actually supported a higher small school adjustment. But again, this was a decision that was made by the working group to go with that 10%. And as Travis is going to talk about here in a minute, just starting this year, 2024-25, we actually increased the small school adjustment at KSU and at Moorhead to try to level that playing field, if you will, and allow them to compete more effectively in the performance funding model. But anyway, that's the allocable resources. You back out debt service, you back out mandated programs, and you back out a small school adjustment, and the rest of the funding for the universities runs through the performance funding model. This slide shows the university model metrics on the left, the KCTCS model metrics on the right. This is pre-2024. These metrics changed with changes in the performance funding statute just this past legislative session. But just concentrating on the university model, you can see that we've got progression metrics at 30, 60, and 90 credit hours, total bachelor's degrees. And you can see by that red bracket that these metrics are graduated in terms of scale. They go from 3 to 5 to 7 to 9. We wanted to emphasize and provide incentives to get students to the finish line. And so it's progressively higher levels of weighting for each of those metrics. We also had premiums for STEM plus H bachelor's degrees, underrepresented minority bachelor's degrees, low-income bachelor's degrees. You can see the course completion component there, which is the largest single component in the funding model at 35%. And then, of course, the operational support metrics, M&O, institutional support, and academic support at 10% each. Now, how did the working group make decisions regarding those metrics and allocation percentages? Well, first of all, we wanted the metrics to be closely aligned with the desired state goals for higher education. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, we also wanted to use commonly used metrics that were being used in other states, so we looked at that as well. We wanted to provide incentives for institutions to accelerate progress toward those identified goals. I just mentioned that we wanted to graduate, use a graduated scale to assign greater weight the further a student progressed toward completion. And then lastly, we wanted to provide premiums for those high priority populations that I just mentioned. So those were all of the decisions that came into play and how that first original performance funding model was developed back in 2016. And now I'm going to turn it over to Travis to talk about we've had 2 funding model reviews, one in 2020, one in 2023, and Travis is going to speak to both of those at this time.
Thanks, Bill. So the funding model review process, we'll answer a few questions in discussing that. Why did the group convene in 2020 and again in 2023 to conduct the reviews of the funding model? What was the charge of the work group? What was the process that the work group went through? How many times did they meet? How did they do their review? And what did they ultimately end up in their recommendations? So the working group's charge is in KRS 164092 in the end of the statute there. And again, as Bill mentioned before, that work group that was created in the budget bill back in 2016 is the same composition of the work group that we have now, actually codified in the model. And I think this is was a good proposal by the General Assembly here to really put a continuous improvement model in place for the funding model so it can be continuously reviewed on a 3-year basis. So every 3 years, the work group gets together and they convene to determine if the funding model is functioning as expected, identify any unintended consequences of the model, and then recommend any adjustments to the model. They have to do that. The recommendations have to go through to the governor, the Interim Joint Committee on Appropriations and Revenue, and the Interim Joint Committee on Education by December 1st. So every 3 years, this happens. And it seems as if, 3 years comes by pretty quickly. And so basically every 2 years, we're starting to pull folks back together again to really talk about the model. Again, this continuous improvement model, I think, really works. That 2020 work group, the first work group, this was all done. You can look there on the year. That was during the COVID year. So we were doing this via Zoom. The working group met between July 30th and December 2nd. Even though we were virtually in very uncertain times, the work group took their charge seriously and worked very hard to review the model and determine what changes might need to be made. They took a look at the trends in student success outcomes, the financial impact information, and how campuses had responded to the funding model. And ultimately, they decided not to recommend any changes to the funding models as prescribed in existing statute. Again, the model was just in place for 3 years at this time, and we were still really trying to see, what was working, what wasn't working, and seeing how things would move. And 3 years was a little early, although you'll see here in the 2023 timeframe some more substantial changes were going to be made. However, they did propose changes in how the model would be applied moving forward, beginning 21 and 22, and this relates to the bases of the institutions. So what the recommendation was to establish a general fund floor or base level of state support for each institution, what we call the funding floor for 2020, 2020, 21. So it's important to remember when this model was first implemented, we had significant stop-loss provisions in there. And actually, the first model, the first funding that was put in the performance fund was a 5% cut into the institution's bases in order to be reallocated. So we were implementing this model. It seems, we're in such a better position financially as a state now. We appreciate, the investments that are being made in the performance funding model now. But at the time, we were making changes and adjusting funding in the model through cutting institutions. So it was a very difficult environment.
So for the first 4 years that the model was implemented, there was no new funding. It was all carve-outs based on the stop-loss added to the performance fund.
Right. And so to get this general fund floor stabilized, to say that we're not going to cut into institutions' bases anymore and just apply the model moving forward to new funding was a huge win, I think, and a great move by the General Assembly in order to solidify budgets, because institutions were very concerned that they were going to continue to achieve equilibrium in funding for the institutions through cutting. And so we said we're not going to do that anymore. However, moving forward, while in prior model we had any funds earned in the performance model each year were added to the institution's base, we determined that, or General Assembly determined that we would keep all money moving forward into the performance fund. So essentially each year the funds would need to be re-earned in the model, and we would continue to add money to that model, to that fund every year moving forward. So the 2023, so that was the 2020 work group. 2023 work group just finished its meeting last year, met 5 times between January 25th and September 6th. Reviewed the model the same way that was done last time, although this year we had 6 years of data to look at as opposed to 3. Reviewed proposed changes to the model, again, talked about to the president, see how it was working on their campuses. And on September 6th, we received a consensus on a set of recommendations, which ultimately went into a bill that was enacted, and I'll talk about that in a second.
Well, and that third bullet I think is very important. Not only did they review, discuss proposed changes to the models and reach consensus on those recommended changes, but the working group also looked at options for the biennial budget operating funds request for the institutions. And there was a lot of discussion about, do we want any of the earned funds to that point to become recurring to the base of the institutions? Or do we want to ask for an across-the-board inflation adjustment for the upcoming biennium? And ultimately, the presidents and the policymakers that were part of that working group determined that in order for every institution to be able to get some new dollars during this upcoming biennium, that there needed to be a recommendation for an across-the-board increase. The council, I believe, requested a 6% increase in the first year of the biennium and a 9% increase in the second year. The General Assembly very generously provided a 4% across the board inflation adjustment for the institutions. Thank you very much, members of this committee and the General Assembly, very much needed. But that plays into the budgetary impact of the 2024-25 distribution. When you have some institutions that did not receive, like KSU did not receive any additional dollars from the performance distribution, Morehead State University a little over $200,000, but they did receive that across the board base increase. And so if you look at those two things combined, institutions like Morehead and KSU actually fared pretty well in terms of their percent increase, actually above the university average and the sector average for both of those institutions. So that's important to keep in mind as you look at the distribution for 2024-25.
So in these work group meetings, we also met with campus CBOs. Obviously, presidents were met with in the group meetings, and we reached this consensus on a biennial operating funds request, as Bill had just discussed. And so that just sort of gives you a visual. I won't go through all these, but it just kind of gives you a visual of the work that's gone on as part of these working group meetings. And I'll mention too, these working groups. So obviously, Representative Tipton's in part of that group and participated. But any of you all, these are public meetings, and certainly welcome anybody. And please tell your colleagues to attend as well if they're interested in the funding model. So the work group members voted unanimously to recommend 5 changes to the university funding model. And so that one of the biggest changes there is that number 1 item is increase of premium to provided for bachelor's degrees awarded to low-income students. It was at 3%, and we move into 8%. And we talked about this a little bit in some of our testimony in the past session, but we really need to do better with our low-income students. Once we get them in the door, our graduation rates, retention rates, when we get those folks, when we can get them in, we do really well with them. But our actual numbers overall of low-income students that we're getting to recruit and come into our campuses are decreasing. And so, as we find, and we'll talk about this, about how the model is moving things forward, when we incentivize things, we see movement on the campuses, and we really want to double down on trying to engage with our low-income students. We also added a new adult learner metric to the model. This is not as part of the percentages in the weights with the low incomes, but as a premium in the credit hours earned section. So we are adding a premium for adult learners and credits earned and awarded to adult learners. We're also eliminating a degree efficiency weighting for a bachelor's metric. This is a little bit in the weeds, but we looked at this. This was a metric to sort of take into account to weight per 100 FTE students how many bachelor's degree awarded to sort of manage institutional enrollments and the differences there. But we decided to go to a simple approach there to really look at just the bachelor's degrees awarded by our institutions and not weight those. Bill already mentioned the increased small school adjustments to KSU and Morehead State. We also increased the non-resident credit hour weighting from 0.5% to 0.75, and that really just captures, the more out-of-state students that we're enrolling. Still, we're not leaving any in-state students behind. Those are still being recruited heavily. We want to get more in-state students, but we are enrolling more out-of-state students.
And it also creates better alignment with the council's tuition and fee policy with respect to non-resident students.
Correct.
Whoops, wrong direction.
It's okay. The KCTCS funding model, they also were 6 recommended changes to it as well. They added some similarities that you will see. They added a new adult learner metric to the model. They also, and that actually counts degrees conferred to these adult learners. They also allocated an equity adjustment to the community based on a community needs index, sort of a way to embed something in the model to better account for the different populations that the different community colleges serve. It reduced the weighting in the progression metrics from 12% to 7%. That's progressing over time towards their associate's degrees. It merged some metrics and related to the economic, some of the degrees that really respond to the economic needs of the state, and some reductions on credit hour weightings to account for some other populations that we're looking for as well. You can see there, this is a similar slide to what we saw before for the original version of the model. You'll see there highlighted that first-generation student bachelor's degrees awarded and the student degrees awarded at 1% and the 1.5% to the KCTCS and university models. That's in relation to the bill that was passed. So all the recommendations from the work group was adopted, but we also, General Assembly, through a floor amendment, also removed the underrepresented minority student metric from the model, replaced it for this running of the model with redefine it as underrepresented students, define that as first-generation students for this go-around, and then the work group will actually convene over this year to come up with a final definition for underrepresented students. So those meetings will probably start next month, but for this go-around, we use the first generation as the definition per the legislation that passed.
Okay, if you don't mind, I'm going to
Yeah, sure.
Bring up right now. We're going to have a hard stop at 12 o'clock. So
Okay.
So
We're almost done.
If we can do a quick wrap up and
Yeah.
see if there's any questions.
Yeah,
and,
these.
I also recognize President from Morris State University this year as well. He may have some comments or questions or something like that as well. So
Okay.
I always want to invite our presidents to speak as well. So hard stop at 12 o'clock.
Okay,
So if you
great.
can wrap it
We'll,
up so we ask questions.
A couple more minutes and we'll be done. And then we'll be happy to answer any questions. So to assess the effectiveness, what outcomes do we expect to achieve by adopting the new funding model? And over the past 6 years, how has the model delivered on the expectations? There were several outcomes that we were hoping to achieve to address the shortcomings of the previous funding model. Again, come up with a more rational allocation method rather than the base plus method of allocating funding. Rectify some disparities over time between the institutions, and accelerate progress towards meeting state goals. So again, as I mentioned before, we're no longer distributing based on historical share, but actually outcomes produced. And the approach reflects changes in enrollment, program mix, and degrees awarded. The model also provides incentive for progressions in some of the areas that the General Assembly was interested in. And the institutions have reacted to this model strategically in changing their internal budget models, to changing their internal financial aid models at the institutions in order to react to the priorities set forth in the model through the General Assembly. As you can see here, most of the funding disparities that have been developed over time have been rectified. And if you look at the blue bar there, that's the fiscal year 16-17 per FTE, full-time equivalent student funding, again, of those allocable resources. And then you have the red bar there is the changes in this past fiscal year. And as you can see, those red bars for the comprehensive universities, with the exception of KSU, which is just, quite frankly, such a small institution that it will never, look along the same lines as our institution. We have some open the door funding that needs for institutions to even be able to operate, and so we always expect them to be an outlier. But they are less of an outlier than they used to be. And obviously, also our research institutions are funded at a higher level too, which has historically been the priority of the General Assembly as well. So you can see we're making some progress there. It should never be equal. All the institutions are different. They have different missions, serve different populations of students, but they are starting to approximate that FTE enrollment number. And as you can see there, we're making progress towards our goals too. And if you look there at our total bachelor's degrees awarded, we're up 3%. STEM, H, and URM bachelor's degrees have improved significantly over that time. We're really proud of closing those achievement gaps and also, producing more STEM, H degrees. You don't see low income degrees on there. It's roughly flat, maybe down a little bit. But again, that's one of the reasons why the model pivoted and put more of an emphasis on those students. And you can see there, that's just our overall progress towards 60 by 30, the 60 by 30 goal that we talk about all the time, and we're on progress to make that. I'm very proud of that work, and I think it's nice to know that the funding model that the General Assembly has adopted is aligned with this, and I expect we're on track to make it, and if we continue to fund higher education as we have been these past few years, I think we'll most certainly make it.
Thank you for your presentation, and this is a learning process for me as well, so I may back up on some things that you've already covered. When I first looked at the performance funding, I saw it's almost like you use one brush to paint the whole wall, rather than you got regional universities and you got your research universities and then you got KCTCS. You do separate KCTCS from the others, but it's still not quite the same, from my view, the same game with having regional universities and with the same model with, your research universities, because they have they got more resources. So I just didn't understand that. And also looking at some of the models, I didn't understand some of the metrics for the adjustment had to do with square footage. Mm-hmm. I just, that we take care of that through the asset preservation. Didn't know why that was in the performance-based funding model. And as I hear you speak today, the current model that we've got, we won't really know how that's going to impact until next year, I guess, when we see the data from that. Because what I've seen in the past is this model working? And it's working for some and not for others. Right. If it was rural, small communities, whether it's 4 or 2 years, it seemed like they struggled more to have access to this funding or to be able to get to the level where they could get funding than the larger institutions or much more urban, settings. So that was just my quick view of that. And I've just, the bottom line is, we've had it for 7 years now.
Yeah, the 2024-25 was the 7th iteration. That's correct.
Okay, is it working?
Overall, we believe that it is working, yes. And I would like to comment on a couple of things that you said, and I'll start with your last comment first. We recognized, the working group recognized, that KSU and Moorhead were having a more difficult time competing in the funding model than the other institutions. We took the small school adjustment from KSU and bumped it up by $6.6 million to essentially get them to funding parity to start the 24-25 fiscal year. We bumped the small school adjustment up at Moorhead by $1.6 million, again, to try to get them to funding parity. That's part of the reason why Moorhead had a small distribution from the performance funding pool in 2024-25. I will point out that Murray State is the next smallest institution. They actually got, I believe it was $4.1 million in terms of the distribution this time around. And part of that, out of 10 metrics, on 8 out of 10 metrics for the 2024-25 fiscal year, they had growth rates above the university average. And so they had the best performance that they've had since the performance funding model was implemented. And so that increase in their performance, along with the increase in funding from $97.3 million to $105 million, the General Assembly appropriated $105 million in the first year of the upcoming biennium. That allowed Murray State University, who is more of a rural institution, a smaller institution, to substantially increase their share of funding from the performance funding pool. So basically, to answer your question then about square footage, those three metrics, the maintenance and operations component, the institutional support component, and academic support component, those are what we call the open the doors money, that portion of the model. Every institution has certain fixed costs that they have to pay for, and so we wanted to make sure that some of those fixed costs were going to be covered at each institution for maintenance and operations based on square footage, academic support based on number of FTE students. And so that's the reasoning for having that metric included, that 10%, and then distributing that metric based on share of square footage.
It's essentially a proxy for size of the institution. You've got and this model allocates all funding, all allocable resources, again, minus what Bill discussed earlier about being brought out of it. So in order to account for all the funding, we're accounting for other things other than just, quote, performance. I mean, pure performance, when you talk about the metrics that we're looking at, is a small portion, again, but we're allocating all the resources. And that part of that came down to the decision, I think, for the first work group and really deciding whether this was going to be an outcomes-based model or a targeting goals type model. Because if you had targeting goals, you could set aside a certain small amount of funds and say, well, if you meet your targets, you can get this amount, or if you don't, we don't. The work group decided to go in a different mode where they would actually allocate all the resources of the institution.
And I'm going to make one last comment, if I may. At the time the funding model was developed back in 2016, 35 out of 50 states had adopted outcomes-based funding. We looked at every one of those 35 states and we said, are there any states where the research institutions are separate from the comprehensive institutions? And in no single state was that the case. They were always combined under one funding model. And in the two-year college sector was always separate. And so that, I think, informed the working group in terms of making that decision to have the research institutions and comprehensives included in the same funding pool.
Thank you. Want to reach out to President Morgan. Do you have any comments or questions you want to? You got 1 minute, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. Jay Morgan, President of Moorhead State University. I had not planned to speak today, but I appreciate you calling me up. My colleagues here, who I've worked with for a long time, I've chewed on their coattails a little bit, as well as Dr. Aaron Thompson, related to the model. And as you can see over time, and if you look back historically, Morehead State University, we feel like has been disadvantaged in the model. There's a couple of reasons that we feel that way. Number one, it did show in 2017 that we had per student funding that was higher than others. But if you look at the model related to total public funds for an institution, Morehead State University specifically was keeping their tuition low. So there's an offset there. The tuition elasticity for some of our regions in Kentucky, and the region that my institution covers, Morehead State University, our tuition elasticity is gone. And we've been responding to some of the comments from the General Assembly to try to keep tuition low, and we've done that. Second lowest tuition only to KSU and the Commonwealth. So I would like maybe on a go-forth basis to have more of a policy level discussion on should there be more state support for institutions on a per student basis that represent rural, smaller, harder hit areas of Kentucky that don't have tuition elasticity left, and we've kept the tuition low. The second part that I'd like to see some discussion around is the weights within the model. I don't dispute, Mr. Chairman and committee, some of the metrics in the model. It's hard to dispute graduation rates, progression. So I think we've got a lot of the right features in it. But I have to ask the question broadly, why is a graduate from Morehead State University worth a 1.0 and a graduate from another institution, a research institution, worth a 1.7 or 1.8 premium? Why are those not the same? So there's some pieces of the model that I hope that our working group and the General Assembly dialogue with going forward. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Now, I'm sorry that we're going to have to stop pretty quick here because I did say we'd have a stop time. Actually, we're a little bit over that. So thank you for your presentation very much. We'll probably have you back at some point, no doubt, to address some questions. And meanwhile, if somebody has questions, we can send them to you and get some feedback there. Is that okay?
Yeah, please do. Have anybody reach out to us. We love to talk about the model and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Our next scheduled meeting will be on Wednesday, July the 17th. And Senator Dean will be chairing that one. And there's no further business. For the subcommittee, we will hear a motion for adjournment.